Hello, my little giants. Miss Carp here with chapter 21 today. As per usual, my chapter is very long. It's actually 16 pages. And I had mentioned in a previous video that each page is roughly 2 to 3 minutes each. So you figure 16 times 2 is about 32 minutes. Add a little bit more time to that, it's even longer than 32 minutes. So I figured you guys wouldn't want to sit through half an hour of a chapter. So I am going to only read half today, and I'll read the other half to you tomorrow. I'm actually going to record both today, so if I'm in the same shirt and you see the same shirt, you're not like, wow, Miss Carp didn't change for 2 days. I am going to film it all today, but I won't release it or publish it until tomorrow. So, without spending any more time telling you how long the chapter is, let's get right into chapter 21, called The Plan. The head of the army and the head of the Air Force stood at attention beside the Queen's breakfast table. Sophie was still in her seat, and the BFG was still high up on his crazy perch. It took the Queen only 5 minutes to explain the situation to the military men. "I knew there was something like this going on, Your Majesty," the head of the army said. "For the last 10 years, we've been getting reports from nearly every country in the world about people disappearing mysteriously in the night. We had one only the other day from Panama. For the hatty taste," cried the BFG. "And one from Wellington, in New Zealand," said the head of the army. "For the booty flavor," cried the BFG. "What is he talking about?" asked the head of the Air Force. "Work it out for yourself," the Queen said. "What time is it?" 10 a.m. In 8 hours, those 9 bloodthirsty brutes will be galloping off to gobble up another couple of dozen unfortunate wretches. They have to be stopped. We must act fast. "We'll bomb the blighters," shouted the head of the Air Force. "We'll mow them down with machine guns," cried the head of the army. "I do not approve of murder," said the Queen. "But they are murderers themselves," cried the head of the army. "That is no reason why we should follow their example," the Queen said. "2 wrongs don't make a right." "And 2 rights don't make a left," cried the BFG. "We must bring them back alive," said the Queen. "How?" the 2 military men said together. "They are all 50 feet high. They'd knock us down like 9-pins. "Wait!" cried the BFG. "Hold your horseflies! Keep your skirts on! I think I has the answer to the maiden's hair." "Let him speak," said the Queen. "Every afternoon," the BFG said, "all these giants is in the land of Noddy." "I can't understand a word this feller says," the head of the army snapped. "Why doesn't he speak clearly?" "He means the land of Nod," Sophie said. "It's pretty obvious." "Exactly," cried the BFG. "Every afternoon all these 9 giants is lying on the ground, snoozling away in a very deep sleep. They is always resting like that before they is galloping off to guzzle another helping of human beings." "Go on," they said. "So what?" "So what you soldiers has to do is to creep up to the giants while they is still in the land of Noddy, and tie their arms and legs with mighty ropes and wunking chains." "Brilliant," said the Queen. "That's all very well," said the head of the army, "but how do we get the brutes back here? We can't load 50-foot giants onto a truck. Shoot 'em on the spot, that's what I say." The BFG looked down from his lofty perch and said, this time to the head of the Air Force, "You is having belly poppers, is you not?" "Is he being rude?" the head of the Air Force asked. "He means helicopters," Sophie told him. "Then why doesn't he just say so? Of course we have helicopters." "Wapsie big belly boppers?" asked the BFG. "Very big ones," the head of the Air Force said proudly, "but no helicopter is big enough to get a giant like that inside." You don't put him inside," the BFG said. "You sling him underneath the belly of your belly bopper." of your belly popper and carry him to the Portito. Like a what? Said the head of the Air Force. Like a torpedo, said Sophie. Could you do that, Air Marshal? The Queen asked. Well, I suppose we could, the head of the Air Force admitted grudgingly. Well, then get cracking, said the Queen. You'll need 9 helicopters, 1 for each giant. Where is this place? The Air Force man said to the BFG. I presume you can pinpoint it on the map? Pinpoint? Asked the BFG. Map? I never is hearing these words before. Is this Air Force bean talking slush bungle? The Air Marshal's face turned the color of a ripe plum. He was not used to being told he was talking slush bungle. The Queen, with her usual admirable tact and good sense, came to the rescue. BFG, she said, can you tell us more or less where this giant country is? No, Magister, the BFG said, not on my Nelly. Then we're jiggered, cried the Army General. This is ridiculous, cried the Air Marshal. You must not be giving up so easy, the BFG said calmly. The first titchy bobstickle you meet, and you begin shouting, you is Biff Squiggled. There's a picture of how large the BFG is, so I'm just going to show it to you real quick. And the Army General was no more used to being insulted than the Air Marshal. His face began to swell with fury, and his cheeks blew out until they looked like they were 2 huge ripe tomatoes. Your Majesty, he cried, we are dealing with a lunatic. I want nothing more to do with this ridiculous operation. The Queen, who was used to tantrums of her senior officials, ignored him completely. BFG, she said, would you please tell these rather dim-witted characters exactly what to do? A pleasure, Magister, said the BFG. Now listen to me carefully, you 2 boot-bogglers. The military men began to twitch, but they stayed put. I is not having the foggiest idea where giant country is in the world, the BFG said, but I is always able to gallop there. I is galloping forthwards and backwards from giant country every night to blow my dreams into little chidlers' bedrooms. I is knowing the way very well. So all you is having to do is this. Put your 9 big belly hoppers up in the air and let them follow me as I is galloping along. How long will the journey take? Asked the Queen. If we is leaving now, the BFG said, we will be arriving just as the giants is having their afternoon snozzle. Splendid, said the Queen. Then, turning to the 2 military men, she said, prepare to leave immediately. The head of the army, who was feeling pretty miffed by the whole business, said, that's all very well, Your Majesty, but what are we going to do with the blighters once we've got them back? Now, don't you worry about that, said the Queen. We'll be ready for them. Hurry up now. Off you go. If it pleases Your Majesty, Sophie said, I should like to ride with the BFG to keep him company. Well, where will you sit? Asked the Queen. In his ear, Sophie said. Show them, BFG. The BFG got down from his high chair. He picked Sophie up in his fingers. He swiveled his huge right ear until it was parallel with the ground, and then placed Sophie gently inside it. The heads of the Army and the Air Force stood there goggling. The Queen smiled. You really are rather a wonderful giant, she said. Magister, the BFG said, I is wishing to ask you a very special thing. What is it? Asked the Queen. Could I please bring back here in the belly boppers all my collection of dreams? They is taking me years and years to collect, and I is not wanting to lose them. Why, of course, the Queen said. I wish you a safe journey. The BFG had made thousands of journeys to and from giant country over the years, but he had never in his life made one quite like this. with 9 huge helicopters roaring along just over his head. He had never before traveled in broad daylight either. He hadn't dared to. But this was different. Now he was doing it for the Queen of England herself, and he was frightened of nobody. As he galloped across the British Isles with the helicopters thundering above him, people stood and gaped and wondered what on earth was going on. They had never seen the likes of it before, and they never would again. Every now and then, the pilots of the helicopters would catch a glimpse of a small girl wearing glasses, crouching in the giant's right ear and waving to them. They always waved back. The pilots marveled at the giant's speed and at the way he leapt across wide rivers and over huge houses. But they hadn't seen anything yet. "Be careful to hang on tight," the BFG said. "We is going fast as a fizzle crump." The BFG changed into his famous top gear, and all at once he began to fly forward as though they were as it's a tongue twister. He began to fly forward as though there were springs in his legs and rockets in his toes. He went skimming over the earth like some magical hop, skip, and jumper, with his feet hardly ever touching the ground. As usual, Sophie had to crouch low in the crevice of his ear to save herself from being swept clean away. There are 2 pictures. One of the helicopters. And then another one showing him just look at the bottom. He's in the bottom. That's the BFG. Okay. Give me a second. Sorry, guys. It skipped ahead. Okay. The 9 pilots in their helicopters suddenly realized they were being left behind. The giant was streaking ahead. They opened their throttles to full speed, and even though they were only just able to keep up. In the leading machine, the head of the Air Force was sitting beside the pilot. He had the World Atlas on his knees, and he kept staring first at the atlas, then at the ground below, trying to figure out where they were going. Frantically, he turned the pages of the atlas. "Where the devil are we going?" he cried out loud. "I haven't the foggiest idea," answered the pilot. "The Queen's orders were to follow the giant, and that's exactly what I'm doing." The pilot was a young Air Force officer with a bushy mustache. He was very proud of his mustache. He was also quite fearless, and he loved adventure. He thought this was a super adventure. "It's fun going to new places," he said. "New places!" shouted the head of the Air Force. "What the blazes do you mean, new places?" "This place we're flying over now isn't in the atlas, is it?" asked the pilot, grinning. "You're darn right it isn't in the atlas," cried the head of the Air Force. "We've flown clear off the last page." "I expect that old giant knows where he's going," said the young pilot. "He's leading us to disaster," cried the head of the Air Force. He was shaking with fear. In the seat behind him sat the head of the army, who was even more terrified. "You don't mean to tell me we've gone right out of the atlas?" he cried, leaning forward to look. "That's exactly what I am telling you," cried the Air Force man. "Look for yourself. Here's the very last map in the whole flaming atlas. We went off that over an hour ago." He turned the page. As in all atlases, there were 2 completely blank pages at the very end. "So now we must be somewhere here," he said, putting a finger on the blank page. "Where is here?" cried the head of the army. The young pilot was still grinning broadly. He said to them, "That's why they always put 2 blank pages at the back of the atlas. They're for new countries. You're meant to fill them in yourself." The head of the Air Force glanced down at the ground below. "Just look at this godforsaken desert," he cried. "All the trees are dead and all the rocks are blue." "The giant has stopped," the young pilot said. "He's waving us down." There's a picture of the pilot and the head of the Army and the Air Force. And this will be our last page before We stop. Okay. The pilots throttled back the engines, and all 9 helicopters landed safely on the great yellow wasteland. Then each of them lowered a ramp from its belly. 9 jeeps, 1 from each helicopter, were driven down the ramps. Each jeep contained 6 soldiers and a vast quantity of thick rope and heavy chains. I don't see any giants, the head of the army said. The giants is all just out of sight over there, the BFG told him. But if you is taking these slosh-buckling, noisy belly poppers any closer, all the giants is waking up at once, and then pop goes the weasel. So you want us to proceed by jeep, the head of the army said. Yes, said the BFG, but you must all be very, very hushy quiet. No roaring of motors, no shouting, no mucking about, no piggery-jokery. The BFG, with Sophie still in his ear, trotted forward, and the jeeps followed close behind him. Suddenly, the most dreadful rumbling noise was heard by everyone. The head of the army went pea-green in the face. "Those are guns," he cried. "There is a battle raging somewhere up ahead of us. Turn back, the lot of you. Let's get out of here." "Pig spiffle," the BFG said. Those noises is not guns." "Of course they're guns," shouted the head of the army. "I'm a military man, and I know a gun when I hear one. Turn back." "Those is just the giants snortling in their sleep," the BFG said. "I is a giant myself, and I know a giant snortle when I is hearing one." "Are you quite sure?" the army man said anxiously. "Positive," said the BFG. "Proceed cautiously," the army man ordered. They all moved on. Then they saw them. Dun, dun, dun. I'm going to stop here for part 1, and I'm going to continue recording part 2 in just a couple seconds. So, hope you enjoyed part 1 of chapter 21. Look forward to part 2 tomorrow. Miss Carp, out.